Did you know that you can win your political asylum case without having any proof of the harm you've faced or the threats that you've received? I'm going to tell you how you can get asylum without having documents, the testimony of other people, or any kind of evidence supporting your claim. If we're just now meeting, I'm Brian Manning and I'm a political asylum lawyer. I worked for over a decade for the government's two main agencies for asylum and refugee matters, and now, as an asylum lawyer, I help people pursue their American dream through asylum. I've heard lots of people say that they neglected to tell a government officer about something bad that happened to them because they didn't have proof of it. The thinking is that, well, if you can't prove it with some kind of documentary evidence, it's best just not to raise it at all, or else the government might think that you're making it up. And you don't want the government to think that you're lying to them, right? And this thinking also keeps a lot of people from applying for asylum at all. They think they won't have a shot at winning their case if they don't have documents or other forms of evidence supporting their story. So they don't apply, despite that they might actually have a really strong case. And this is a shame because this line of thinking is actually wrong. You see, in reality, you can get asylum without proof. Now, this is because the evidence that you provide through your oral testimony, meaning what you say during your asylum interview or an immigration court, is often sufficient all by itself. You see, the rules for this say that testimony alone is sufficient to establish facts in an asylum case as long as the testimony is detailed, consistent, and plausible. In other words, you don't need any proof to back up your story, and what you say at your asylum interview or an immigration court can be enough all by itself to show that you're eligible for asylum as long as it's detailed, consistent, and plausible. Now, let's talk about that last part. What does it mean for your testimony to be detailed, consistent, and plausible? Well, let's start with the detailed part. So this basically means that you've got to provide actual details when you describe something that happened. For example, if the asylum officer asks how many people attacked you, what were they wearing and what did they say, and whether they were carrying weapons, and you responded with, I don't remember, or I don't know, well, that would not be detailed testimony. The officer or immigration judge expects you to be able to provide at least some level of detail about what you are alleging happened. Now, it's of course understandable that you don't remember every little thing from a given incident, especially given that we're probably talking about traumatic incidents. You can't just speak in generalities or be really vague. Let me give you another example. If an asylum applicant says, the guy from the government threatened me, the asylum officer is probably going to expect the applicant to be able to explain what the threat actually was. And you're not expected to quote your persecutors verbatim, but you do need to render at least the essence of the threat. And if the asylum applicant says, well, I don't know, it was just a threat, or he threatened me, well, this would probably be problematic because it's not detailed, it's vague. All right, remember we said that your testimony alone can be sufficient to get you asylum where it's detailed, consistent, and plausible. We just discussed the detailed element, so let's talk about the consistent part. This is really important because it's where lots of asylum cases are lost, when an applicant testifies in an inconsistent manner. Now, to be inconsistent basically means to be contradictory, to say something but then to later say something that doesn't line up with what you had said earlier. For example, if early on in your asylum interview you say that the first threat from the bad guys happened at a football game, but then later in the interview you say that it was at a movie theater, well, that would be an inconsistency. You'd be testifying inconsistently about where you were when the first threat occurred. And this happens all the time with dates and time frames. For example, an asylum applicant says the last encounter with the people they fear happened in March, but then they later say that it happened in May. Well, that would be an inconsistency. And if you have multiple inconsistencies in your testimony, the government can say that you're not credible and that your story can't be believed. And that can be a reason to deny your asylum claim. Note that it's not just things that you say that can be considered inconsistencies, but also things you provide in writing, like as part of your asylum application, for example. And when I was an asylum officer with the government, I saw this happen all the time. An applicant would have written one thing in the personal statement that they submitted with their application, but then they'd say something to contradict it during their asylum interview. And it's actually a shame. I saw some people get denied by my colleagues for being inconsistent where I believed it was really just honest mistakes or faulty memory. You've got to be very careful in presenting your case not to provide inconsistent statements in writing or in your testimony. All right, we're ready for the third prong in the detailed, consistent, plausible formula. What does it mean for your testimony to be plausible? Well, plausible basically just means believable or reasonable or realistic. Like, could the thing that you're saying happened have actually happened? Or is it pretty much impossible? For example, if someone says that the bad people pushed them off of a 10-story building, yet they didn't suffer any injuries, well, that would probably be viewed as not plausible, because it's implausible that falling 10 stories to the ground would not result in pretty serious damage. If you write or say several things that just don't make sense or things that seem objectively impossible, well, your testimony could be deemed implausible or not plausible. Okay, now, note that you've got to have all three of these things working for you in order for your case to get approved without evidence to support your claim. Your testimony has to be detailed and consistent and plausible. And finally, let me just say that it's best to have both. It's ideal to have both some kind of physical evidence to support what you're saying and to provide testimony that's detailed, consistent, and plausible. But you should not let the fact that you don't have hard proof or hard evidence stop you from applying for asylum or keep you from telling the whole story about what you've been through. If you've got questions about this or about asylum, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you. You can send me a message through my Facebook page, the Manning Asylum Law page, or leave a comment under a video on the Manning Asylum Law YouTube channel, or call my office at 713-909-0401. I'm Brian Manning, and it's my honor to support you in your asylum journey.